Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, and in this video I'm going to look at how I make ICC printer profiles when I'm testing papers and when I'm testing printers. Now, I've got quite a lot of articles written over the years about profiling, about various kit and stuff, but I realised I'd never actually shown in a video the kit I use to make the profiles, and the device I use for reading the test charts is this. It's an i1iSis. Now, this is an oldish version. This is the original XL version, so it'll take a 13-inch by 19-inch sheet of paper, so it's A3 plus. Now, I'm going to show an example here of how it works and making a profile. This is for a fine art paper I tested just recently and made some profiles for. Now, this is for colour, and I'll also show how I use this particular test image for testing black and white performance of printers and papers and inks and whatever. But anyway, the software itself, i1 Profiler, I'm running it here. I'm running not quite the latest version because I'm running it on my old laptop here. Now, this is software that you get which is licensed for different functionality. The version I've got here, because I do testing with X-Rite, I've done this for many years, and I've got a version here which sort of has like the access all areas pass enabled on it, so it will run absolute everything. But I'm just doing basic RGB profiling here. Now, thing is to remember, printers may use CMYK inks, but normal printer drivers for desktop printers, photo printers, are RGB devices. That means you profile them as an RGB device. You do not make CMYK profiles, and you certainly don't edit your photos in CMYK. There are occasional specific reasons why you might consider something like that, but in general, I've done a video about why you should never ever use CMYK for printing your photos. I know it seems obvious because it's CMYK inks being used and variations of that, but the devices are treated from a color management point of view as RGB devices. Anyway, here it is. I've opened up the software. I've selected a patch set. Now, patch set is just a collection of colored patches here. Now, this is how I'm going to read them in, but the basic patch set itself is just an arrangement of all the possible colors that can be printed. Well, I should say can be printed, can be sent to the printer for it to print. We send out these coloured patches, the printer prints them. I'm not going to go into the printer printing side of it. There are several bits of software you can use. I use the Mac Color Sync utility for printing it because you need to print these with color management turned off. There's no point having color management turned on if you're trying to create profiles to be used by color management. So you have to turn it off. That can be a bit tricky for some things, but as I say, I use the Mac Color Sync utility. There's an Adobe utility for printing. You can actually print directly from here, but although I never do that. I have these files saved as TIFFs, and I just print them off, and I generate these pictures here. Here's the settings. Now, I can print loads of patches. If you're using a manual measurement device, then there are many reasons why you would not want to. This one uses nearly 2,200 patches on this particular sheet. If you're reading them manually, a chance for error is much increased. But if you're reading them with this device here, and I've got a photo I'll just cut in here to show the insides of the device from my review that I wrote in 2007, the original review of this. So I'll put a link to that in the notes for that so you can see what it does. But this is the device. It scans across, it reads these patches. Now this, the original XL, if you want to include ultraviolet light in your measurement system, and you generally should when measuring this, it needs to do a dual scan, so it's going to take a while. I'll speed up the process a bit in the video here, but you get the gist of it. That's the patch set. The patch set is not the target. The patch set needs creating into a target. There's a test chart. So the patch set is now incorporated into a test chart. You can see it's got a black line at the top here. It's got some these little diamonds on the side. The black line and the little diamonds are what the device here and the software uses for aligning the paper and knowing where it is, because there's a scanner inside this. The spectrophotometer is quite small and it just scans backwards and forwards across the paper and it measures things. Now, I've got this, there's my target. I can print it. There's a print option here for it, but I've printed it elsewhere. I've got these saved as, certainly on this machine, I've got them saved as TIFFs, so I just print them off that. I've now got the device set up here and I'm going to make some measurements. The device is detected here. It has two scan modes. I can do single scan, dual scan. Single scan just measures light, not including ultraviolet. Dual scan happens to measure stuff including that. It's because of the construction of this device, it needs to do two scans. If you buy one of the new versions of this, the XL Mark II, then it'll do it in one scan, so it's quicker to use, certainly useful if you're in a production environment. But the basic device is the same, yeah. And I need to scan with UV because although this paper doesn't have any, you need it to compensate for optical brighteners. If you try scanning to make profiles using a scanner, for example, and I've had several people ask about using scanners to make profiles, the problem is that you've got a limited number of light channels that are being measured. Effectively, it's just red, green and blue. And scanner-based profiling systems, they can work for some papers. The software you'll get will have had much of the work has been done beforehand, so they either work or they don't work. The problem is there's no surefire way of knowing when they're going to work. They work with well-behaved papers and printers, but for doing the job properly, you need something like this. Now, the the old i1 Studio, Color Studio, CC Studio, and I've got one of the devices here. I've got all these different devices, and I'll show a few more of them sometime. But they're spectrophotometers, so they measure lots of channels, so they measure the spectral response of the light that is being reflected off these colour patches. Anyway, here we are, we've got this. I'm just going to set this RGB printer. I'm going to set it to matte paper. These particular settings, I'm never entirely certain whether they make much difference. i1 Profiler has got better over the years, but it's never been exactly properly getting helpful information as to what these various settings mean. So an awful lot of people who use it use just the settings they know that work and never experiment very much. It could be better documented, but you know, it works, and it's assumed that if you're going to be using kit like this, and bear in mind that a new one of these will set you back well over £5,000. Yeah, it's not cheap. But anyway, we've got everything set up. I'm going to measure it. It says here, press measure to begin measuring. I'm going to just click on measure. There are the patches, and I'm now going to have to load this device, this paper, into the device. Now, this is a thickish paper, so it's at the limit of what this is happy with, but there we go. It's always just that little bit of, is it going to work when you're using thick papers with this? The fact that it's doing this drawing it in and measuring suggests that it is going to work. Here we go, and it's now measuring. Measures 2 rows at a time, so it scans across, scans back again. These little diamonds on the side of the target are detected, and they're used for eliminating any skew in the paper going through. Now, I'm just now going to let this run through, and time will pass. Doesn't pass very quickly if you have to do lots of these. Several minutes have passed waiting for this to go, so it's not quick, and this is with an A3 sheet. There is lots of useful information that you can store if you use one of these things regularly. So you can store patch sets, you can store targets if you create stuff specifically. Some of the standard ones are what I normally use, but if you want to do extra stuff on it, there are workflows you can save. There's lots of tricks. The software itself, I could put a spectrophotometer on or a colorimeter and actually use it for calibrating, profiling this screen. It does that as well. Anyway, it's coming up, it's doing its measurements, looking towards the end here. I've got several stages. Here we go, it's come through, it's scanned the picture. So we'll take that out, that's that done with. Now, one of the things is I've now got this data. Now I can save this data if I really want to and use it for use. It's spectral data. So think of the light reflected from each target as being split into little channels of different wavelengths. So it gives you dozens and dozens of different measurements across the colours, and that gives a spectral response rather than just a colorimetric response as you would get from a colorimeter if you were using for screens. So for print you use a spectrophotometer for best results. Now it says measurement saved there. I don't think we'll bother saving it this time. Now at this point, if I want to, I can double click on any of these measurements and I can actually see what the measurement is, and I get measurement data in the side here. Now it gives a spectral response, it tells me what the value of the target was, so in this case 0, 0, 0, so this is black in this top corner. I can see the response here, the spectral response, and it's pretty flat, which is what I expect. This is printed on pigment ink printer. If I printed on a dye-based printer, although it's black, I would expect to see a slight rise up in the long wavelength or the red end of the spectrum. That's because the dyes, black dyes in dye-based printers are not perfectly black across the colour range. They're less dense in deep red colours than they are in other colours, and that's one of the reasons why black and white printing can be tricky on dye-based printers. Now if you look at any of the reviews, look in the written reviews for the details for it, and I've got aspects of this that are mentioned, and this is where the graphics that I put in those reviews come from. It's screen grabs off this particular bit here. Now I can see other details on it. I can see, for example, the settings. I can see density. I get a measurement here. I can see that the blackest black that this is printing at the moment is got a Dmax of 1.62. Great if you love numbers. If you want the numbers, they are here for you to pour over to your heart's content. Analyze, you can do multiples of them. You can do all kinds of stuff. Now I'm going to just make sure that I've set here to UV included, so I'm using the full data set for making my profile, and I'm now going to step through. I've got the data, I'm now going to make the profile. Just go through to the next stage. This is where I get to decide what illuminant I'm going to use for the profile. Now the standard is D50. Now this squiggly line is a rough approximation to the spectral output of the sun, of daylight I should say. So these little dips and various things are because it's not a smooth spectrum that you get in daylight. The colours here are more just for show than anything else. You can pick a standard illuminant, so you can hit D50. So this makes your profile for daylight use. Now, you might think, well, hang on, I never view my prints in daylight. Why not use a different illuminant? Yes, you can. So you could use a spectrophotometer, not a one like this, but a handheld one like an i1. You could use that and you could measure a light source. You can generate this shape here as an illuminant, a source of light. You can save it. I've done a few here. I've looked in the past at getting measurements from LED bulbs, cold fluorescent lights, or just ordinary tungsten lights even. You can set this to whatever you like, and then you make a profile which is customized to that lighting. Now, what it means is that if you know, and I've used this once or twice, where I've known a print is going to be installed with a particular type of lighting. Now, in the case that I used it, it was for fluorescent lighting, fluorescent tube lighting, and I knew it would throw out the colours of the picture. So I made a profile, custom profile, and produced a print that was customized to the lighting. Now, this is quite a few years ago. I'm going to suspect that those fluorescent lights have now been replaced by LED lights. The spectral response of LED lighting is different, so therefore that print that I went to all the trouble of making to match the lighting is going to look wrong. Am I really that bothered? Well, no, it was years ago. Nobody's got back to me and said there's a problem with the print doesn't look right anymore. It's one of those things. I've been paid for it, so that's long ago. So I'd be curious if I get to visit the site again, if it's even there. That's the other thing. A lot of commercial prints, I sell them. I'm not offended if after 2 or 3 years the offices are redecorated and new prints are got in. Ideally, I'd like to supply some of those prints, but these things happen. So it's a way of customizing your printing by using custom illuminants, but it needs quite a bit of work because you've got to measure the light source, you've got to create the stuff for this. So it's doable. A lot of people think, oh, what a really neat idea, I could do that. Yeah, it's a really neat idea, but it's a right pain to do and it's a lot of trouble. Suffice to say, I best be being paid an awful lot of money for a print before I go to all this trouble to do custom profiles. Now, this is one of the reasons I mentioned saving the results earlier, because if you save the results, you can go back and remake a new profile at a later date, and you can change the illuminant setting. So illuminant setting is something I normally just skip through. I don't usually bother with that at all. Next up, we have the profile settings. You'll notice a gloriously empty screen because that's all you get. I'm going to go for, I can change the perceptual rendering intent to some extent. So I'm going to look here. I'm going to go for custom. I'm going to expand these just so we can see how much data. You don't get much. I use custom settings there. These settings are very poorly explained anywhere. You may have reasons to change them. You may see people have explained reasons why they will use different versions for producing slightly different versions of profiles. Remember, there's no such thing as a correct profile. There is a profile which works, which does a particular job. There's no right way of doing this. There are just lots and lots of options. These adjustments, by the way, only affect the perceptual rendering intent. They don't reflect on the relative colorimetric rendering intent for when you actually do the printing. Because of the way I do this, it means if you've ever had any of the profiles that I've produced for printer reviews, paper reviews, etc., if you've ever had any of them, do see what the picture looks like in perceptual and relative colorimetric rendering or intent. The two are subtly different. Some images, not much difference. Some images, one is better than the other. There's no one is best, but it's whatever works best. I've also got, I can optimize quality or size for the profiles. I always click on the optimize quality. It makes big profiles. That's why the typical profiles I generate are 3 or 4 megabytes. You get smaller profiles, I don't see any reason to skimp on it. So I just optimize the quality of it. There is an option here under advanced where I can change the smoothing. Now, smoothing is how the data is interpreted to create the profile. The software knows what those colors should be. It knows what they've been measured at, and it's going to use that to make a profile. The process that's going on inside, there are lots of options. There's lots of secret sauce in this of things that are just never explained. These are trade secrets for X-Rite in their software that drives all of this. Suffice to say, don't bother changing anything here. You can choose between version 4 and version 2 profiles. Version 2 profiles may be safer if you know people are going to be using things on old systems, because some systems don't properly support all aspects of version 4 profiles. I've not found a problem. I just use a few particular Macs around here and I don't get a problem with it, but it's just worth of note. But there is nothing else here that you would normally adjust. This bit here, you just take the only thing I ever change is just set it to large, the quality, and sometimes on rough papers I may do, because there may be a little bit of variation, I'll do something here. I'll put the smoothness up to advanced setting rather than default. doesn't make much difference, but it sometimes makes profiles a little bit better, particularly if the target printing has not been that good. Now, for some, why would that not be good? Some papers, textured papers, the measurements can be very dependent on the angle of the lighting and things like that. So you can get a bit of variation in it. In general, leave well alone. There's nothing much to touch there. Now, let's go to the next stage. And here, I just have to give the profile a name. Give it a meaningful name, because you will forget what it is. And the name should ideally tell you what the paper is, what the printer it's done for, and what the media settings, because those are the things you need to use the profile. You need obviously the right printer, you need the right paper, but you do need the media settings. So I'm just going to call this one P5000. P5000 WC310. I'm not going to go through the full bit of typing it in here. This is just really just for show, but I've been making profiles of this for years, and I can look at my old profiles from years ago and I can tell what printer, paper and media setting they were used for. Make sure you do this. If you do multiple profiles at the time, if you do one and then go back, remember to change this, because this text, if I was to go back and measure another chart after I've made this profile, this text would still be the same as before, and it will generate the same named profile for a different paper. So just make sure you fill these things in. And all I have to do now is it's going to put it in. I'm just going to get it to generate the profile. This also takes a while. There is a progress indicator here. It says 9% already. Don't be fooled. It's one of those progress indicators that gives you the impression that it's just moving across like that, whereas what's actually gone in the background, take it as a rough indication. Now, I could, when I've made this profile, I could generate a second iteration of the test chart. If you're using smaller patch numbers, so if I was printing on an A4 sheet, now on this particular scale, I can get nearly 1,000 patches on a sheet this size. 1,000 patches is good enough for a good profile. If I wanted to make a particularly accurate profile, or I was concerned with aspects such as grayscale reproduction or something like that, I can get a second profile to be made, a second profile created. And what happens here is that I take the profile that's been made, and I can hear the fans firing up in the laptop here, because there's a lot of calculations going on in the background here. I can get a second target made. I'll print that the same as I printed the first one, scan it, go through the process, and it refines the profile. Now, if you use enough patches to start with, you rarely need to do the refinement stage. If you only use a few patches, so if you've got, say, the CC Studio, the old Color Monkey, if you're doing that, you've only got 25, 30 patches to start with. So the iterative approach is very important, the fewer patches you start with. You might think, well, I've got, nearly just over 2,000 with this particular target. How many do I need? Well, there's a diminishing returns. I use the A3 and A3 Plus targets purely because I've got this, and it makes it really easy to use. So I can use about 2,200 on an A3 sheet. I can use nearly 3,000 on an A3 Plus sheet. That's 13 inch by 19 inch. And I've found that going any higher than that, I don't really get any benefit. And there's some argument would say that the differences between patches, if you have, say, 6,000, 8,000 patches like that, the differences become so small that they're lost in the errors that are generated by the instrument, because the instrument only has a certain level of accuracy and precision when it's making measurements. So there's a certain point where just putting more and more patches in gets you nothing. Even with an automated scanner like this, it still takes a few, several minutes to scan an A3 Plus sheet. So in general, don't bother with lots of patches. If I was using a manual scanning, I would probably be happy with 1,000 patches on this. Maybe if it was a paper that was a little bit tricky for some reason, paper that didn't seem very linear when I printed out and seemed non-even, uneven, I might do a second sheet on that. But it's a luxury, this device, and I appreciate that, and not many people are probably going to have one of these sitting around. If you find one on eBay, I would say an i1iSis, either this or this is the XL, the version that does the big sheets. There is an i1iSis normal one which takes letter and A4 sheets, a smaller device, and it really is just a smaller device. Everything is just a smaller version of it. If you find one of those, remember that you need software to work with it. This particular device, I don't know about the Mark II version of it, does not contain licensing information. That means that this software here, oh I see it's generated a profile, is working because I've got a USB dongle attached in the side here, which is activating the software. I say, just because you get one of these cheap, the software to drive it may not be workable with it. Just bear that in mind if you suddenly think, oh, I've seen one of those on eBay, that'd be nice, I can make all my own profiles. Yes, you can, but anyway, here's the profile it's made, and we get this sort of wireframe display of it, and this is I can rotate this round, I can do various bits, and I can look at it, and that's it, it's done. If I want to, I can compare other profiles. I can look at different wireframes. They don't tell you a great deal. When you look at this shape here, the biggest indicator of it is, does it look smooth? If it's got dents and holes or spikes on it, that's a suggestion that there's been a measurement error. Now, measurement errors can come from a whole host of reasons. It could be that paper has flaked and so a patch has a bit of white on it. It could be there's an ink spot on it. It could be some problem in the paper or something like that. But if you see a nice smooth shape like this, it's a pretty good indicator that everything works. So there we go. We've got profile. It's done. I did say I'd just do a quick mention of the black and white one here as well. Now I'm going to go back to the home screen. Be careful jumping back to the home screen because it deletes all your data that you've stored. So those measurements, they were there. I could have gone back and created a different profile. Up until that point, I clicked go back to home, in which case it wipes everything. Note to X-Rite software people, if you're deleting data, tell the user and offer them a chance not to do it. I have deleted worthwhile data and I had to remeasure a whole sheet for that. Anyway, this one I'm now looking at, this one is black and white. I've got an article about this, so if you're curious about it, I'm just going to show the reading of it. But all I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change this to CMYK printer. Yeah, I know I said don't use CMYK, but this is just the measurement mode because I'm actually just measuring black and white, the C of CMYK. This was printed using a normal driver. This probably used the Epson ABW driver, the black and white driver. It's still printed, it still counts as a RGB device, but for measurement purposes, I go here to CMYK and I'm going to go to measure reference chart. I've got a saved workflow and it even remembers the i1iSis XL. This is done so I can do this really quickly to do these measurements. I've got versions of this which can be used with other measuring devices as well. You can do it with a scanner even if you want. There are lots of ways you can make use of this. This image has been, versions of this have been produced for several years and it's a standard black and white test image. I've got articles which go into details about how to use it, and there's a video or two about it as well. But there we go, there's the step wedge, and that's that step wedge there on this. This big black line here and that are all just to make sure this feeds through automatically. So I've got that there, and all I need to do is measure it. Click on here. I don't have all the profile generating options I had before because this is just measuring a test chart. There is the chart. I want to do it. Let's say I'm just going to do this with single scan. It's a bit quicker. And as before, click on measure. Draws it through, detects the start of the chart, and is doing the measurement. That was it setting things up, and now this is the actual measurement. And we're done. Measurements, okay. Now, here are the measurements I'll just make it. Now, this may be useful for if you're doing negatives, if you're doing digital negatives and printing and you want to check for linearity and things. That's what this is for. So I put links to the articles which say why this is produced. But here we go, I can double click on that. There's white. There's black. Now, I only did the single channel measurement here, so the two lines are not quite the same. But that's it. If I want to check for black and white print performance, I just run this through. So there you go. That's how I use the i1iSis. Now, there are other things you can do. There's an optical brightener compensation package. You can get some targets. I've got stuff. If you're interested in actual details of this, have a look at the proper review of it. The one that I wrote in 2007 when I first got this, I got this because I was involved in testing it when it was first released, and it's been very useful, a very useful device. I've generated a lot of profiles, and all the profiles, or almost all the profiles that you'll have been, if you've downloaded any of my profiles from printer reviews, they will have been made on this, using this software. So there you have it. Hope that's of use, give you an overview of what the process is for using this. And if you've got any questions, please ask. I could be doing some more colour management stuff and lots more printing stuff. Certainly if I get some more printers to look at, I'll be doing more profiles. So thanks for watching, and please do subscribe to the channel. Thank you.